There Will Be Blood frequently features in lists of the top 100 films ever made. The Grammy Award-winning score was composed by Jonny Greenwood of Radiohead, and it's widely regarded as one of the most influential soundtracks of recent years. Now, for the first time, Greenwood's going to be performing it live with a 50-piece London Contemporary Orchestra during 2 screenings at the Roundhouse next week. Jonny Greenwood has written a total of 7 film scores, alongside his role as Radiohead's lead guitarist, keyboard player and co-songwriter. I went to meet him at the famous Abbey Road studios and asked whether it made a big difference to a film audience hearing a score played live as opposed to recorded.
I think it's as big as the contrast between recorded music and live music. You know, some things can still go wrong. Things are being done just for the room and just for the moment. That's what makes it so interesting. And when we recorded the soundtrack, the best moments were when I was sitting with Paul, the director, in amongst the orchestra while they were playing.
And has it presented any technical difficulties for you and the conductor and the orchestra, the idea of doing it, performing this score live?
Yeah, it's funny, I was talking to the conductor, Hugh Brunt, last night, and he was pointing out that some of the music was played very loudly by the orchestra when it was recorded, but then used very quietly in the soundtrack. And how can you do that when the orchestra is in the room? One of those nice problems that we've got, to solve next week.
I mean, is that quite frustrating for you as the composer? Because presumably you want the music to take precedence over the film.
I think I've had it really easy. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those directors that when he uses music, he really uses it. He cuts some of the film to the music even.
Oh, really? Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, like the scene when Daniel is out hitting the poles into the landscape and they're doing the survey for the pipeline. That's the part that's got Popcorn Superhet receiver with the plectrums playing the violins, and he just took that and then cut the scene to that.
The first 6 minutes of There Will Be Blood is quite famous for having no dialogue. We just see a rather grubby, sweaty Daniel Day-Lewis with a pickaxe prospecting for oil. Because there's no dialogue, the score takes on a heightened importance. How did you first discuss this scene with the director, Paul Thomas Anderson?
He sent me lots of footage of the landscape, and it was all about trying to write big music for the landscape and more intimate chamber music for the characters. I mean, I was keen for it to be orchestral just because the film is set in the turn of the century and I wanted to use technology that was around then. It's quite confusing because you can hear that it's old-fashioned sounds, but just, doing slightly strange things with them. Can
you give us some example of how you use technology that would have been around then?
Well, I think of an orchestra as technology, really, and we used an on martineau, which is this electronic instrument, cheated a little bit because it was invented in the 20s.
I mean, for people who don't know, including myself, exactly what this on martineau is, I mean, all I know is it's an early electronic instrument. Can you describe it for me and the sound it makes?
Yeah, it's like a electric cello. It's something that you can control the pitch of. It's a string, and you put your finger in a ring to control the string up and down the keyboard, and you've got a very sensitive button to control the dynamics. And yeah, it's like a 1920s idea of how to make music with electricity in quite a pure way.
Now, in the film There Will Be Blood, oil is a sort of metaphor for blood, isn't it? It's set in this very barren Texan landscape where nothing grows, but the oil under the ground is the lifeblood. Tell us how you approach that one key scene where you see the oil discovery, you see all this oil spouting out of the earth.
It was to try and have music that's quite primal and just out of control. We wanted a kind of unison rhythm to convolve from chaos. There's me sitting on the floor of the Radiohead studio like a toddler in a playgroup hitting drums one at a time over the course of a whole day, and eventually you get this big sort of percussive chaos sound. But it was more kind of kindergarten than.
It was almost like a heartbeat, though, isn't it? Was that the idea, to have the blood pumping like oil through the earth?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's tribal in that sense.
It's 3 years since your last album with Radiohead. Are you working on another, or presumably you don't have time with all this other stuff going on?
We've just taken this year off, and we get back together in September and And yeah, I'm going to start and see what happens.
And does the orchestral work and the film scores and so on, does that feed into what you do with Radiohead and vice versa?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we're anxious anymore about strings and getting players like that in. It just becomes another kind of tool that we can kind of reach for.
Now, you've worked, I think, on 3 scores for Paul Thomas Anderson altogether, because after There Will Be Blood, there was The Master, and I think you've got a new one, Inherent Vice, coming out next year. How closely do you collaborate with him? How does it work?
Very closely, and over months and months as well. We've become good friends, really, and he's great company, and he's got that thing of being able to inspire people to really want to do everything they can. You know, everyone's excited to work with his films. This last score for Inherent Vice was meant to be just 1 or 2 musicians, and then he started sending me examples of what he'd like the music to be, and it was all, 50-piece orchestras. So
you've got an orchestra involved again.
So suddenly it just all changed, and we were here recording an orchestra just a few weeks ago. So
there was huge acclaim for There Will Be Blood when the film came out for the score, but it was deemed not eligible for an Oscar for Best Original Score because some of the music had been sampled from elsewhere. How did you feel about that ruling, given that so much original music involves sampling from other music?
Popcorn Super Receiver was written as a concert piece, and he used some of that. And I don't know, I was more excited to be asked to do his next film, really.
Because at the time, a lot of people felt you'd been cheated out of the Oscar for Best Contemporary Score.
Yeah, I'm proud of my Mark Commode award that I look at.
That was worth
very
more
happily.
than that.
I think so, yeah.